So in Hungary, 1956, the United States encourages Hungarian rebels to rebel against their communist overlords with promises of aid and guns and supplies. And when the Hungarians do that, we leave them hanging. We leave them hanging because Eisenhower recognized the limitations of rollback. Are you prepared to have American military force confront Russian military force in Hungary? That's the big question. And Eisenhower decides Hungary isn't worth starting World War III. Like Truman decided that Korea was not worth starting World War III, Eisenhower recognized there were limitations in this bipolar world. But in other places, the United States is going to take a more active interest. For instance, in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, prior to World War II, had been called French Indochina. It was a French colony. When France surrendered to the Nazis in 1940, Germany gave French Indochina to Japan. Japan governed it from 1940 to 1945. Then they were nuked. Then they surrendered. The question was, does this territory go back to France, who had rightfully owned it before, or is Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia independent? And that's the big question after World War II. In 1945, the Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians declare their independence, but France wants their colonies back. Who do we side with? The French who want to recolonize Southeast Asia, or the Southeast Asians who are fighting for freedom and independence and democracy? Why do we side with the French? Why do we back our lot with the French in Vietnam? Why? That's part of it. Yes. We were allied with France in Europe, and we're looking at the world as a big chessboard. And do we want to anger the French when we need French support for the Marshall Plan, for the Truman Doctrine, for containment of the Russians in Europe, containment of communism in Europe? We felt it was more important to contain communism than promote democracy, because the folks who were fighting for freedom here in Vietnam were under the command of a guy named Ho Chi Minh. He's kind of the George Washington of Vietnam, and he has the dubious distinction of being a communist. So we were not about to back a communist freedom fighter against the French, even though we had claimed that we were not going to allow for recolonization efforts after World War II. We thought it was more important to contain communism. So we supplied weapons and supplies and intelligence to the French as the French fought to get their colony back between 1945 and 1954. Of course, the French surrender. Why am I French? Of course, the French surrender their position. And we had seen the French as a bulwark against the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. And when the French abrogate their responsibility, they give up. When they abrogate their responsibilities in Southeast Asia, America is going to step into their place to stop the spread of communism. Our policy is containment. That's how we get involved in Vietnam. We agree that there will be an independent Vietnam. However, the communists don't get it all. We decide, Eisenhower decides, that Vietnam will be divided in half between a communist North Vietnam and a non-communist South Vietnam with a government backed by this guy. No Diem. He is a Catholic in a predominantly Buddhist country. He is also trained and backed by the CIA. So he's our guy running South Vietnam, keeping the communists at bay. And as soon as this line is declared, Ho Chi Minh is going to launch an invasion of South Vietnam to try to unite Vietnam into one country, a communist country. We see communist country invade non-communist country, and that's when containment snaps into place. That's why we're in Vietnam. Eisenhower believed, and subsequent presidents believed, that if you allowed one of these countries to fall, if you allowed South Vietnam to fall to communism, Laos would be next, Cambodia would follow, then Bangladesh, then India, then Pakistan, then maybe Iran, maybe the entirety of Asia would fall to communism like a set of dominoes. And so therefore, under Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon, they all practiced this idea. They called it the domino theory. You stop the dominoes from falling. You bite, like Nixon said, you bite the bullet here in Vietnam. All right. So Eisenhower has us in Vietnam after the French leave. We are also interested in what's going on in other places. For instance, the Middle East, Iran, 1953. The Iranian people democratically elect, let me emphasize, a guy by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh, who believes it is not right for the British and the Americans to be extracting oil from Iran and profiting from it. He wants Iranian companies to run Iranian oil wells. It's called nationalization of the industry. Mossadegh is elected. He announces he's going to nationalize the Iranian oil fields. British Petroleum and Standard Oil, it's Exxon, get their panties in a wad. They go to Eisenhower and they cry, boo-hoo, the Iranians are taking over their oil fields and we're going to lose profits. I think he may be a communist. That's all he had to do. I think he may be a communist. And Eisenhower sends the CIA in to destabilize the Mossadegh regime, overthrow him, and replace him with a dictator, a guy by the name of Reza Pahlavi, who has the title Shah, King, Emperor. Reza Pahlavi, his father had backed Hitler in World War II. This is our guy. He's given weapons. He's given intelligence. He's given all this stuff in order to keep the communists at bay in Iran and make sure the oil flows for America and its allies. The Iranians have long memories. In 1979, the Iranian people rise up and overthrow this guy, and they blame us for having foisted this guy on them for 20 years. They take over the American embassy in Tehran. They hold the American embassy hostage for 444 days, and it cripples Jimmy Carter's presidency. Because we gave the Shah safe haven here in the United States. We were holding him. And the Iranians wanted him back because he had tortured people. Watch the movie Argo. Okay? So, talk about about long memories. That was 1979 when that, and we're still dealing with the blowback. We're still dealing with the blowback from all of this. Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon. Why? Because they are afraid of us. We are afraid of them. We are also interested in making sure that the communists do not dominate the Suez Canal. Eisenhower says it must be the policy of the United States to prevent the spread of communism, particularly in the Middle East. That is the Eisenhower doctrine. And it comes about as a result of something called the Suez Crisis. Egypt takes over the Suez Canal. Britain and France ran it. Egypt takes it over, nationalizes the Suez Canal. England and France don't like that. So they get Israel, which had declared independence in 1948, and the Arab countries did not like that Israel was created in 1948. There had already been an Arab-Israeli war in 1948. So there's already animosity there. Britain and France get Israel to invade Egypt. And then Britain and France come in and take over the canal. But they get Israel to do their dirty work for them. Egypt requests aid from the Russians. And the Russians start sending military equipment. And Eisenhower says, whoa, that's getting out of hand, my friends. Stop. Britain and France, go back and think about what you did. Israel, you're our guys. Get back to where you belong. We'll tell you when to move. Egypt, if you want help, you don't get help from the Russians. We'll supply you with the money. And since then, the two largest recipients of U.S. foreign aid have been Israel and Egypt. And it's to keep the Russians out because, guys, the Suez Canal, that is a choke point. Oil needs to get from here to there. Oil, the oil you rely upon. 1954, Guatemala. The Guatemalan people democratically elect, this is a popular refrain here, the Guatemalan people democratically elect a leader, a president. He announces that he is nationalizing the fruit industry in Guatemala. The Guatemalans are tired of being a banana republic. And so they're going to take over their banana plants, their banana fields, from the United Fruit Company owned by the United States. United Fruit Company gets on the horn to Eisenhower. Boo friggity hoo! The Guatemalans want to take over their banana plants. So, this guy, Jacobo Arbenz, he might be a communist. Who knows? The CIA is sent in. The CIA trains Guatemalan rebels. The Guatemalan rebels overthrow the democratically elected president of Guatemala, and we replace him with a dictator who does our bidding. You liking this? Good stuff, huh? In Cuba, the Cuban government is basically overseen by us. We have installed every leader of Cuba since the Platt Amendment of 1903. We've basically given the blessing on Cuban leadership. The Cuban people finally get sick of it in 1958, and they rebel against Juan Batista and the American overlords who put him in place. And they don't elect, but Fidel Castro takes over. And we declare Castro to be a communist, and Castro says, you're damn right, I'm a communist. And he starts accepting aid from the Russians. This is him and Russian Russian leader Nikita Khrushchev. And now you've got a communist country 90 miles from Florida in Eisenhower's second term. We try all sorts of things to dislodge Castro. We try arming rebels, we try poison wetsuits, we try exploding cigars, I kid you not. We try a number of different CIA operations. By the way, if you haven't noticed, that's a favorite method of Eisenhower to get things done. Use the CIA. It's what's called the hidden hand. Then, we're flying high-altitude spy planes over Russia. In 1960, one of our spy planes gets shot down. Eisenhower says, "Oh, wasn't us. It was just a weather plane. We were monitoring polar winds." And then the Russians dragged the pilot out. The pilot was still alive. And they put him on trial, and he said, "Yes, I'm a spy for the United States, flying spy missions over Russia." Huh?
He had pictures too.
And he had the pictures, exactly. I mean, the Russians knew everything, and Eisenhower's out there saying, "Oh, it wasn't us, oh, it wasn't me, oh, it wasn't me." Poor Ike, I mean, he's like 73, 74 years old by this point. And a lot of people are thinking, maybe Eisenhower's losing it a bit. And so it winds up the Eisenhower presidency on a significant down note. Khrushchev and Eisenhower were supposed to get together for a summit in Geneva. This canceled that. And as you get into the Kennedy presidency in 1961, relations between the U.S. and Russia could not be worse. When Eisenhower leaves, in his farewell address, there are only two farewell addresses you need to know. Washington's farewell address and Eisenhower's. Eisenhower warns the American people that we must, he says, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. What's he saying?
Don't let the military run the politics and economics.
That's right. He said, don't let the military run our politics, because we're going to be in a war all the time just to perpetuate the profits of the military-industrial complex. Yet Eisenhower's the guy that built up the military-industrial complex. Maybe he realizes the monster he created at the end of his presidency. I don't know. All right, the 1960 election, it's about television. Kennedy looks youthful, rested, ready. Vice President Nixon, sweaty, suffering from the flu, hadn't shaved, eyes darting all over the place. A lot of people that listened to the event thought Nixon won. If they listened to it on the radio, if they were watching it, they thought Kennedy won. But it shows the power and influence of television. Television maketh, check her speech. Television destroyeth. Presidential election. Modern civil rights. It's a byproduct of World War II. It begins with CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. That was A. Philip Randolph's organization. They are going to try to promote desegregation in America. And a number of elements of progress are going to take place. Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier in 1947 in Major League Baseball. Watch the movie 42. Truman desegregates the armed forces. He may not have gotten his civil rights bill passed in the Fair Deal, but he does issue an executive order to desegregate the armed forces. A lot of very conservative people thought that desegregating the armed forces was going to somehow destroy unit. They called it unit cohesion. That it was going to destabilize the morality of the unit to have blacks now in their midst. That's the same thing that they use about women. It's the same thing they use about gays. Everything's fine. Everything's all good. All get together. Emmett Till, this was a kid that was killed. He was visiting his grandmother down in Mississippi for the summer. He looked at a white lady the wrong way, and the KKK came in the middle of the night, lynched the poor kid, and threw him in a river. Rather than quietly bury the kid, the mother had an open casket funeral in Chicago to let the world see what the South had done to her son. Yeah, a lot of people think that the killing of Emmett Till is what sparked the modern civil rights movement, but there are a lot of cases like this. Brown v. Board of Ed, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that this overturns the separate but equal idea that had been laid down in Plessy, thank you. Thurgood Marshall was a lawyer for the NAACP. He argues the case. The Supreme Court rules 9-0 that schools around the country must desegregate. Thurgood Marshall parlays that into being named the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court by Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. The South doesn't take kindly to that Brown decision, and you've got Strom Thurmond issuing what is called the Southern Manifesto. That's right, our old friend the Dixiecrat issues the Southern Manifesto, basically saying that the South shall resist with all its might the decisions of the Supreme Court and this highly improper ruling. Yes, quick.
We've never seen that before.
Ah, yes. Again, this is an old trope that runs throughout American history where states don't like what the feds do, and they decide, well, screw it, we're not doing it. I mean, look at what states that are deciding not to enact Obamacare. That's states' rights. It's the same idea, same principle. It's going to take military force in some cases. Little Rock, 1957. Dwight Eisenhower sends federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas to force the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. Look at that.
Yep, she feels like an ass.
James Meredith eventually is the first black student at the University of Mississippi in 1962. George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, symbolically stands in the registration doorway at the University of Alabama to prevent the integration of the University of Alabama. And of course, the girl gets in and Forrest Gump helps her with her books. The Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat. That's what I hear say. But it was Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that organized the bus boycott and organized around this principle of nonviolent protest. And that's pretty much going to be the way of things in the civil rights movement until the mid-1960s. Once you get to the mid-1960s, that's when you start to see Stokely Carmichael, the Black Power movement, Huey Newton, I'm trying to think who else is involved, the Black Power movement. But you're going to see a more aggressive civil rights movement in the mid to late 1960s where blacks are trying to gain more independence over their political and economic life. Eisenhower reluctantly signs a civil rights bill in 1957. All it does is establish a civil rights commission, basically a blue ribbon panel to investigate charges of segregation. Is that segregation? Well, I don't know. What do you think?